More than 1 million people have now signed a petition on 38 Degrees to remove Paula Vennells CBE because of her role in the wrongful prosecution of post office staff as part of the Horizon computer scandal. So let's take a look through this petition. You can decide whether or not you support it, and we'll also take a look in a moment at the CCRC and its role in all of this, which is the Criminal Cases Review Commission. More about that in a moment. And just as a heads up, this video is partly sponsored, so I thank you for your patience a little bit later for that. Let's move to this petition now. It starts out, evidence has been produced that the Post Office engaged in a mass cover-up which led to the wrongful prosecution of Post Office staff, many of whom were subsequently jailed, bankrupted, and in some cases, sadly took their own lives. The initial Post Office investigation in 2012 failed to find any issues, and as a result in 2012, Second Sight, an independent investigative firm, were brought in to investigate complaints that the Horizon system used in post offices was inaccurate, buggy, and could lose money. Despite pledging full cooperation initially, Post Office subsequently withheld documents from the investigation, and Paula Vennells later filed to answer a select committee when challenged on why this document had not been produced as requested. The damning report, marked as confidential, stated that the Horizon system was not fit for purpose, and among their discoveries were 12,000 communication failures every year, software defects at 76 branches, and that a system was failing to track money from lottery terminal, tax disc sales, and cash machines properly. It concluded that rather than investigate the cause of such errors, Post Office instead accused sub-postmasters of theft. The Post Office dismissed the report, which was subsequently leaked to the BBC in 2014. Despite Paula Vennells' assertion that Post Office, quote, had been working with Second Sight over the last few weeks on what we agreed at the outset, we've been provided the information. To Parliament, at her Select Committee appearance in 2015, the lead investigator for Second Sight, Adrian Bailey, was then asked if this was the case, said categorically, no, it is not, which meant that he could not access the files to back up his suspicions that Post Office had brought cases against the postmasters with inadequate investigation and inadequate evidence. The requested files had still not been handed over to Second Sight 18 months later. In March 2015, on the eve of the Second Sight report publication, Private Eye reported that the Post Office had instructed Second Sight to end their investigation, destroy all paperwork, and scrap the independent committee that had been convened. By the way, the link to this petition is in the description below. You can go ahead and sign it if you wish. In 2019, a class action case, Bates and others against the Post Office, was settled by the Post Office in favour of the 550 sub-postmasters for over £58 million. As I understand it, without admitting liability either. Mr. Justice Fraser, the judge in the case, concluded that the approach of the Post Office amounted in reality to bare assertions and denials that ignore what actually occurred, at least so far as the witnesses called before me in the Horizon issues at trial are concerned. It amounts to the 21st century equivalent of maintaining that the earth is flat. Mr. Justice Fraser, so concerned by what he had seen in the case, passed the file to the Director of Public Prosecutions. Jumping to the conclusion of this text here, having been handed a CBE for services to the Post Office and moved out into other senior positions in government and healthcare, it is only right that this award is now withdrawn through the process of forfeiture. And as an aside, Prime Minister Rishi Sunak has said, and I quote, that he would strongly support the Honours Forfeiture Committee if it decided to look at revoking Ms Vennells CBE. Rishi Sunak has, of course, urged anyone else that is involved in this to come forward immediately. Now, let's take a look also at the CCRC, what it is, what it does, and how it's been relevant to this case. So just as a brief overview of it, first of all, the CCRC is an independent body. It is set up under the Criminal Appeal Act of 1995, which established the Criminal Cases Review Commission. And statistically, it's brought more than 100 miscarriages of justice to have their convictions quashed following referrals from the CCRC. So as I say, it is an independent body that looks at those who've been wrongly convicted or wrongly sentenced. These cases are for those that have already lost their appeal. If they find something wrong with a conviction or a sentence, they send the case back to the Court of Appeal. And to launch a fresh appeal, there needs something like new evidence or an argument that makes the case look different than it is now. So how do they operate? Well, they are completely independent. Many people will believe that it's part of government, it's part of the same system, etc., a phrase that I hear all too often, but in fact, it's a completely independent organisation. They do not work for the government, they do not work for the courts, they don't work for the police, and they don't work for the prosecution. They don't work for anybody. A little bit like a lawyer, a barrister, we are all independent. I've had many of the same arguments myself. I'm part of the system, etc., etc. I'm not, they are not. We're all independent. Staying independent, they say, helps them investigate alleged miscarriages of justice impartially, and a case can be referred back to the court if significant new evidence or other major new issue affects the safety of the conviction or sentence. So, for example, in this case, the court finding that this software can and did have these errors is one such reason. So now just a quick word about my sponsor. On the subject of scandals, many of you may be the victim of a scandal yourself if you've bought or owned a diesel vehicle between the years of 2008 and 2018. You see, many vehicle manufacturers stand accused of installing software or hardware and falsifying the emissions readouts of those vehicles. And that is where a sponsor of my channel comes into play, which is emissions.co.uk. You see, over £100 million has already been paid out in settlements to people that have bought these vehicles where there have been claims that the emissions readouts have been falsified. Now, many people might be wondering why this is such a big deal, but when you buy any product, specifically a car, there are going to be a set of specifications to that vehicle. Now, not only do many people buy vehicles based on the emissions, not only for tax reasons, but also for environmental and conscientious concerns, they might well look at those specifics and those emissions specifications for the vehicle, and if they are wrong, and if indeed they have been deliberately manipulated, that might amount to a fraudulent misrepresentation if these claims are proved. So if you've owned a vehicle by any one of these manufacturers on screen right now, you can check your vehicle's eligibility at the link in the description below, or by scanning the QR code that's been on screen. Many people have been paid thousands of pounds each, somewhere between 25 and 75% of the vehicle price, in settlements that, as I said, have now mounted to over £100 million in the UK alone. So check out your vehicle with the link in the description below or by scanning the code. And thank you for allowing me this moment to thank my sponsor for my channel here in helping me to bring these videos to you. And so now let's get back to the story. And so many people have been asking the question, why cannot all of the cases at once en masse be referred to the CCRC that have anything to do with the Post Office and Horizon scandal? Well, there's a helpful blog on the CCR website about exactly this. And broadly speaking, there's two main reasons for it. One is that these cases can't be reviewed and sent to the Court of Appeal without the consent from an applicant, without the consent of the person involved. It describes how the individual who might have been convicted has a choice of whether or not they wish to challenge that conviction or not. Now, it's not as simple to say that everybody would want to challenge a conviction, because going through a prosecution and the process of being convicted is a very stressful one, to say the least. So reliving that and going back through that, even if it is in the form of an appeal, is something that a lot of people simply won't want to do. And so that is the first reason. The CCRC needs the consent from the applicant involved to review the case and then send it to the Court of Appeal. Obviously, in this case, it is almost certain that the case is going to be sent forward, but there are obviously going to be some genuine cases that were genuine theft, genuine fraud, etc., that won't fit into this criteria and have anything to do with the Horizon software. Indeed, I think that there are a few cases like that that didn't go forward that the CCRC have looked at, which I think they describe in this blog. Secondly, it said a significant number of potential applicants have told us that they want to close that chapter on a painful period of their life, which is broadly speaking what I've said. It's a very stressful time for anyone to be prosecuted and to go through that and live through that again. It's one of the reasons that many victims of serious crime don't want to stand as witness to that crime, because invariably it might be quite a long time after the event that they need to go back to court, relive the event, retell the story, and they simply don't want to do that. Thirdly, even where the law would allow it, it's doubtful whether appeal processing should be forced upon a former SMP who's made it clear that they do not wish to appeal. So what happens without consent to review? If the person with the potentially unjust conviction or sentence chooses not to participate, an appeal court would not agree to hear the appeal. So this is just to make clear some of those questions people have raised. Can't they all be quashed en masse? Now, although the government is, as I understand it, looking into various options to do that without going through this process, that is something that only government can do. Next, as there can be no appeal unless there is someone to pursue it, without a consenting applicant, there is no real possibility of the conviction being quashed. So this is a bit like saying unless you are party to the appeal, then there is nothing on which to base that appeal because it needs to be your story if you've been involved. So personally, as difficult as it might be for anyone involved in this, I would personally encourage anybody involved to go through this process, however difficult it might be. I feel, as a person who stands for justice, that it really should be worth going through to allow your name to be cleared. In the event that the person has died, a family member may be able to act on their behalf. So many relatives of those who've been convicted may also have the opportunity to do that as well. If there's no one interested in pursuing the matter, then the CCRC cannot refer the case and there's no possibility of an appeal, whether or not it'd be successful otherwise. But aside from that, there is also the legal backdrop to how the CCRC operates and how these referrals to the Court of Appeal work under the Criminal Appeal Act. And this framework is that which the CCRC works upon and makes its referrals to the Court of Appeal to consider quashing the convictions or the sentence. Decisions whether to refer are made using the legislation set out in that Act. This requires the CCRC to carefully evaluate each individual case to see if there's a real possibility that new evidence or argument will lead to a successful appeal. But the bar is relatively low. A real possibility may be less than a probability or likelihood. And so in this case, where there has been a determination of the High Court that this software can and did have these errors, this is something where everybody has been asked to come forward because, of course, there is a real possibility of success. However, the Court of Appeal has been clear that the Post Office Horizon convictions will only be overturned if the Horizon evidence was essential in each case for prosecution and conviction. And that, of course, comes to the exceptions that I was talking about, whereby in some cases, the key evidence behind the conviction was not the software, not any bugs, and not the software as a result, the miscalculations. Therefore, before making a referral, CCRC must meticulously analyse the evidence presented in each case, ensuring that it meets the necessary threshold for reconsideration by the appeal courts. That said, Sir David Davis, who is looking to question ministers about this issue, told the BBC that there's no real reason that there couldn't be a mass case. And even Sir Keir Starmer has also said that all cases need to be revisited. Ministers are meeting Monday to consider ways of clearing the names of hundreds of sub-postmasters. And as I said in the previous video, it has been described as the most widespread miscarriage of justice in British history. And to date, fewer than 100 people have had their convictions overturned. So once more, let me know what you think in the description below about this petition here. Do you think it's right that Paula Vennells loses her CBE, which she was awarded for services rendered to the post office at the time that all of this was going on? Even between the time of opening up this page and starting to record, the numbers went up by about 4,000 people, currently standing at 1,096,500. If I refresh now, you will see that that now will go up to 1,103,290. So this is growing rapidly, and you might wish to sign it yourself. There's no pressure, obviously. I'm not telling you either way what to do, but I will link this petition in the description below. With that said, I hope you found that interesting and now further understand the CCRC and its role. Please do remember to like this video and subscribe. That helps my channel grow. I really appreciate it. It helps me to reach a wider audience. And as always, thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.